On September 17th, 2013, that's of this year, Grand Theft Auto 5 was released, and people thought it was going to be successful, but they didn't have any idea how successful it was going to be. The game went on to make, $1 billion in 3 days, which is the fastest time any entertainment property has made that much money. It has almost unanimous praise, and on its way to becoming the best-selling entertainment property of all time. But this raises the question, how did this get made? Who made this? How did this thing even come to be? Well, video games are usually made by what is known as a development team. The development team is made up of many different people. A composer makes the music, artists make the art assets, and so on. Today, I'm going to be talking about just one aspect of these things, just the game designer, okay? Just this one role in the game development team. So, today, I'm going to outline the basic steps in designing a video game. Now, for the sake of clarity and time, I'm not going to get too deep into this, and the only type of game I'm going to talk about are a character control game, a game where you have an avatar and you can controlling them through an environment. So I'm not talking about Tetris here, okay? In a very broad sense, the roles of a game designer are these right here. They come up with good ideas, they craft the story and the narrative, and then you have what is known as the 3 C's. A game designer is responsible for the ideas that ultimately get turned into a video game. So this begs the question, where do good ideas come from? Well, Michael Gondry, an award-winning French filmmaker, he's the director of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Be Kind, Rewind. He says this, and I quote, "Every good idea borders on the stupid." I like that quote because it really shows you the uncertain and ephemeral nature of creativity. You don't know. Sometimes you just have to try something and see if it works. Listen to these 3 examples. These are pitches for games. A yellow creature eats dots while being chased by ghost monsters. Second one, a plumber jumps on mushrooms on his quest to rescue his girlfriend. Third one, using a slingshot, fling birds towards pigs that are stacked up on the other side of the screen. See, all of these pitches sound absurd, but all 3 of them were monumentally successful games. The first one is, of course, Pac-Man. Please go forward. The next one is Super Mario. And the next one is, of course, Angry Birds. Angry Birds was not only critically successful, it's massively commercially successful. This game made $200 million in 2012 alone. So, how do you come up with good ideas? Well, Scott Rogers of the book Level Up, the guy who's a great video game design, said there are many ways that you can come up with great ideas. You can brainstorm, you can read a book outside of your comfort zone, you can watch a movie. There are so many things you can do to develop good ideas. But the whole point is to grab a whole bunch of good ideas first, and then you kind of weed out the good ones from the bad ones later. The ideas that you create during this process are not just for the pitch, but they're also for crafting the story and the narrative. Now, in terms of video games, story is the tale that you want to tell, but the narrative is what happens to the player as they play the game. So, for example, if you have Little Red Riding Hood going to visit her granny, that's the story. But the narrative is what happens to Little Red on her way to see Granny. So, an example of good narrative would be, okay, once the player has control of Little Red and the tale is go visit your granny. Now you have this environment that you can explore, or there are caves that you can see, or there are animals that you can play with, or there are collectibles that you can grab. All that is narrative. All that is stuff that you can do that's interesting. Poor narrative would be like, okay, go to Granny, and there's literally nothing for you to do but walk to a house. That's boring. And it's the job of the game designer to make sure that the narrative matches with the story to make sure that it's always potentially interesting. Now, in terms of story, this is beyond the scope of this talk because this is the idea of, well, what is story? What makes a good story? This is so big that it really can't be summed up in this section, but I do have a quick quote from Stephen King, who I believe really summarized it really well. He said this in his book on writing. He says, if you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all, read a lot and write a lot. Seems to go without saying, right? There's no way around these 2 things that I'm aware of, no shortcut. So if you want to share and create experiences for people through the art form of video games, you just have to start. You just have to jump in. And that's the story part. Now, while these first two sections deal more with creativity, the third section deals more with the literal and technical side of it. The first C of these three C's is character. Hello. And the main rule of character is that form follows function. Disney animators figured this out a long time ago. For example, if you have like a humorous character or a character that's designed to be friendly, you make him spherical. Or if you have a character designed to be big and like, you know, angry, you make him an angular character. In addition to the shape of the character, the silhouette also has to read well on the screen. This is important not only so that it reads well, but also you want to create something that stands out well in a crowd. Because if the player is controlling something, you don't want the character to get lost. So that's why the shape is important, and that's why the silhouette is important. The next C is camera. And there are many different types of cameras. I'm only going to talk about three. The first one is the first-person camera. This is a game called Mirror's Edge. So in the game, you can play. You control as a woman, and the camera is the point of view of her eyes directly. Once again, this is a first-person perspective. This is the point of view through which the game is played. The second one is the third-person perspective. This is a game called Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Notice how the camera is pulled back from the camera, and you can see both the character and the environment at the same time. This is a design decision. Why is this so? Because there are certain things that you can do that are more easily done when you can see both the character and the context of the environment at the same time. So that's the third-person camera. And the other one is an oldie but goodie. This is a side-scrolling camera. It's fixed. The player has no control over it. You don't control the camera, but it just follows the player as you move throughout the level. And the third C is controls. And controls has two basic aspects. What controls do you have, and how do you relay this information to your player? Especially if you have a whole bunch of information. Like this is the design control for Halo. And this can be done in two basic ways. The first one is just to flat out tell them, this is God of War 3. You can just, right on the screen, press X to jump. You can just state it directly. This is what is known as explicit direction. Press X to jump. Or, this is the intro to Mega Man X. He drops in, and just go. The game doesn't tell you anything. How do you jump? How do you shoot? How do I avoid enemies? The game doesn't tell you anything. It's up to you. And the game designer's job is to figure out how much of this information do I tell you and how much do I let you figure out on your own. All of that is part of designing a game. So today I've outlined the basic steps in designing a video game. Of course, there's more to it than this. This is a broad generalization and it's just a solid introduction to it, but it does show you what is necessary. You have to come up with good ideas, you have to craft the story and the narrative, and through the three C's, you can start to create the technical sides of what is necessary to produce the game. Thank you.
So Nathan, what did you think?
Overall, I thought the speech was really good. There was a clear attention device of how much it grossed in the first 3 days. The thesis statement, I think, came a little late because he went through a couple slides before he got to the thesis statement. Positives were the visual aids, really grabbing visual aids. It drew the audience with the video games and structure. I think the organization was a little jumbled a little bit because he kept on going back to the this screen that outlined his whole speech. He kept on going back to that one. So, you know, I think it was a little too many slides with that.
Okay.
Overall, I thought it was pretty good. Scripts was good. Maybe too many quotes with the story. And I don't know if you needed to quote the book or anything like that about stories. But yeah, overall it was pretty good.
All right. Well, I actually like the quotes, but I agree with you that, you know, sometimes we're off topic because the
Yeah,
things that we're getting are
yeah,
not the thing that
took away.
you're talking about. Like you talk about the story thing, for instance, and you say, that's not really what I'm going to talk about, but here's some stuff from Stephen King anyway, and I'm going to share it with you. So that I think that does kind of pull us out a little bit. Michael, you already knew that the problem is that you needed to kind of condense it a little bit and focus a little bit more in the presentation. And I think you did a pretty good job at that, but it's still, there's just a lot of stuff that you're putting in. I think you had 5 slides in the beginning that I maybe saw for half a second that, and a couple of them, there was one up there that indicated the whole team, the creative team, for instance, that I barely saw that, and then I saw the insert one that you had that was just talking about the game designer kind of thing, and that part of the team. And whoa, that to me seemed like that's the big pitch at the beginning, and it goes by so quickly that it takes us a little bit out of what it is you're trying to accomplish. And part of the problem is that you've got so much visual information here that you want to include that you're kind of forgetting what the point is that you're talking about at times. And there's so much that I don't have criticisms of the visuals per se, because I think they all illustrated what you were talking about. It's just you needed to narrow your focus. It's just too much that you're trying to do in the amount of time that you've got to do this. So if I was going to give you some advice about doing this, I'd maybe suggest sticking primarily to the narrative information and the 3 C's that you had, and maybe making those the focus of the speech. In fact, maybe picking the 3 C's and just talking about that as the way, you know, this is what I'm going to talk about. There's a whole big picture here. Let me give you a little bit of background of what the big picture is and explain to you, you know, that what I'm going to do though is I'm going to focus on this one aspect that the game designer has to do and why that is important. And I think that might have been a better choice. I thought you had good information throughout the speech. I think that it's interesting and easy to understand. I just wish that I had more time. Like if this was a 15 or 20 minute presentation and you got a chance to take a breath every once in a while, it would feel like I got a really satisfying presentation. As it was, I just feel like I'm getting jammed a little bit on the data, and you need to maybe make some choices. Yeah. You know, the other thing about Stephen King, the comments that you made about to be a writer, you also have to read and you have to write a lot. You also have to choose. And you got to choose what I'm going to talk about and what I'm not going to talk about. Everybody has to decide what's going to be there. And that's the only, I mean, most of what you did was fine. Like I said, all of my criticism just has to do with the fact that it feels like I'm getting
Shortchanged.
well, I'd like a chance to absorb it a little bit, to understand it more. Like, for example, when you talk about the different perspectives, you've got the first person, the third person, and the scroll image that you're looking at. Why do you choose each of those? What makes them better for a particular kind of game? How does it involve the player a little bit more or less? Why do some games do one thing or another? Give me some examples of the game. I mean, you obviously had the visual examples that you were using for those, but for instance, you mentioned Grand Theft Auto 5 at the beginning. Is that first person or third person, you know, as an example? And is the reason it's the most successful of all time because it fits into that category? Do people relate more to games? That's the kind of thing that I thought I needed to get more of, and I just feel like because I'm just getting the definitions, it feels less rather than more, even though there's a lot of material in there. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? All right, I know it's kind of tough. It's a little